Welcome to Informed, Politics and Beyond. I'm John Cronin, local election candidate for Reform for Southwark. Just a quick reminder, if you're watching on my YouTube channel, please, if you like our content, share it with your friends, etc. And most importantly, subscribe. Click on the little bell and you'll get notifications whenever we download content, so you never miss a show. Matt Stevens, my co-presenter, is currently campaigning in Shropshire, supporting Kirsty Wimsley, the Reform Party candidate in the upcoming by-election on 16th of December. After an excellent campaign in Bermondsey and Sidcup. Part of that campaign team is my special guest of the show today, and I'm delighted to welcome Alex Wilson. He was a Reform candidate in the Cheshire and Amersham by-election in June, and also played a big part in supporting the Reform candidates in the London Assembly elections last May. Now Alex, let's start off with the campaign in Bermondsey and Sidcup. It was a well-established Tory seat in which a large amount voted for Brexit. Did you think this was a risk for the party, in that, no disrespect to everyone involved with Reform, but Richard Tice is the leader, the most high-profile candidate we could put forward. If he did badly, it could have done a lot of damage to the party's credibility moving forward.
Thanks, John. And before I start answering the question, I'd just like to say thank you very much for inviting me onto your show. I've seen quite a few of your previous episodes, and there's always lots of interesting discussion and chat and good commentary on the political situation as we're facing today. You're right to kick off with Bexley. It was a fantastic campaign for the party. It's the first time since becoming Reform UK that we've really put together a proper, detailed, lengthy campaign across the constituency. We had an excellent candidate, obviously with Richard Tice, our leader. You're right to suggest that it was a bit of a gamble, possibly, in that if we had a bad result, then it could have looked quite challenging for us.
When you think what happened to UKIP.
Well, exactly.
Yeah,
I mean, UKIP
exactly.
were squashed completely out of all recognition.
Yeah.
But I think because we had Richard as the candidate, it made things a lot easier to get a lot of help. We had huge amounts of volunteers coming, not just from London, but from across the country. We had indeed some support from Scotland as well, which was fantastic. Travelled all that way down to help us campaign. And because we had such an amazing team, a big team of people going out pretty much every day, the only day we didn't campaign on during the campaign was Remembrance Sunday. It meant we were able to knock on every door right across the constituency, collected some hugely valuable data, which meant we could then knock up our pledges on the day, and the result speaks for itself. First time as Reform UK that we've held a deposit in a parliamentary election, which was brilliant, and it gives us a real platform to move forwards. But importantly, not only did we do better than we've ever done before, we also came comfortably ahead of both the Lib Dems and the Greens, got almost as many votes as both of those parties put together. So it was a good opportunity for us, which we seized with both hands. We've really put ourselves on the map, and now looking forward to hopefully getting a similar or indeed better result in Shropshire next week.
Did you find that voters didn't know who we were, and do you think that during this campaign that the party has established an identity with the public?
As a new party, and we are still effectively a new party. Obviously, we do have a bit of heritage from the Brexit Party days, but we are still very much a new party, building a much wider sort of policy platform with a new name. And the big challenge we are always going to face, certainly for the first year or two of doing that, is getting people to be aware of who we are. And that's the sort of first hurdle: get people aware of the name, then what we stand for, and then hopefully the third stage is that people can start thinking about voting for us. But because we were able to mount such an effective campaign, we were able to get that message across. We had countless leaflets that were delivered, and as I said, we knocked on pretty much every door in the constituency, so a lot of people who hadn't heard of us before did hear of us, and indeed a lot of those people then subsequently went on to vote for us. And I think that's a real lesson that we learn as a party for future campaigns. It shows that when we have a strong message, which we do, and we have the team to back it up and take that message to the voters, there is a very clear chunk of the electorate that is keen to hear and support what we're offering.
Okay. What policies do you think were appealing to the voters there, and can we look at the election result as a springboard moving forward as a party?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of people at the moment, for many reasons, that are not happy with how Boris is governing, and I count myself as one of those. I mean, for many years, I think 21 years, I was an active Conservative member, campaigned, held various positions within the voluntary party, and served time as a councillor. But having worked very hard to get Boris's government re-elected in 2019, I feel utterly let down. I think some of the measures that they've responded to the pandemic with have been grossly disproportionate. The fact that we're now on course to have the highest tax burden since the aftermath of the Second World War, and the fact that we're as a country or as a government, wedded to a kind of unaffordable, unachievable fantasy net zero agenda, rather than focusing on keeping your house warm, keeping the lights on, and keeping the economy moving. And those are the things that we campaigned on very, very heavily. A lot of people really concerned about having to replace their gas boilers, which is a big, big issue on the doorstep. We think that ultimately the technology will move on, and we will be in a position to move on to kind of cleaner and greener technology. But for the time being, gas boilers work, heat pumps don't really. And that was a big, big issue we campaigned on. But also tax and the economy. We've had a really difficult year as a country, a year and a half, coming up to 2 years now. And it's how, as a country, as a government, we can respond to that. And we think the best way of doing that is to cut taxes, get the economy moving, get people back to work, higher growth, and ultimately that way you'll have more tax revenues to spend on public services that we need anyway. So it's win-win all round. That's what we're offering. We're the only mainstream party that is offering that, and that's why I think in Bexley and hopefully in Shropshire and beyond, there's a growing constituent part of the electorate that will be interested in that and will support that in future elections.
You touched on the net zero. I was going to ask you, what impact do you think the boiler ban, electric cars will have for ordinary people? The costs out of reach for most normal people. Do you think there should be a referendum on net zero policies, or as Richard Tice calls it, net stupid?
Net stupid, absolutely. He's right to call it net stupid, and what we want is a net smart approach to energy, which, as I said, focuses on keeping the lights on, keeping your house warm, using our own gas resources, fracking, shale gas, which we have resources available. We should be using that and use that to keep the cost down, because the cost is the fundamental issue here. And having to replace your gas boiler with a heat pump, and you have to replace all your radiators and your whole system, it's tens of thousands of pounds, and people just haven't got that money.
People can't afford it.
They haven't got that money sat in the bank. And if you had, you'd want to use it on something more exciting than replacing your boiler.
It shows how out of touch our politicians are, really.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's very easy for someone in Hampstead or Richmond or somewhere, sat on a multi-million-pound house, they can afford it. But ordinary people on places like where we are today, it's just unimaginable, the cost and the impact that will have, and that is something that will resonate and does resonate and needs to be talked about. And everyone is concerned about protecting the environment, and we want clean air, we want clean water, and we want to make better use of resources.
Everyone, not just selected few like LTNs.
Absolutely. Well, I'm sure we can talk about that. I know it's an issue that's of huge concern to you.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I think what hasn't really been discussed properly in the kind of wider public arena and debate is about the cost. And I think I know some people have suggested that a referendum might be the way to do that. I know Richard has added his support to that, and that may well be the best way of getting those arguments out there.
Because it changes it changes the dynamic of the way people live so much.
Exactly. And you mentioned cars as well. The proposed or the ban on new petrol and diesel cars from 2030. That's not long off now. That's
no.
And if everyone's going to replace the cars with electric cars, which are certainly at the moment more expensive to begin with, and then you've got the issues of batteries not being particularly good for recycling and so on. And it's almost like it's a false economy. It's not really the answer. I think going forward, ultimately, both with domestic heating and with motor vehicle transport, hydrogen's probably going to be the answer. Technology's not quite there yet, but it will be. But that's not for today. And for today, for now, we need to carry on using petrol, diesel and gas, because they work. And if we use our own resources sensibly, we can do so more cost effectively and not be reliant on imports from Russian gas and French electricity.
Of course. Let's touch briefly on the by-election coming up next week. Next Thursday's election day.
It is, yeah.
There's been a lot of things going on, like Tory councillors transferring to other right-wing parties, supposedly right-wing parties like Reclaim and ourselves. What do you think? There seems to be a lot of discontent about the Tories in Shropshire.
Yeah, I think so. In Shropshire, in Bexley, and right across the country, I think more and more people who had put their trust in Boris and the Conservatives at the last general election, and as I said earlier, I include myself as one of those people, just increasingly disappointed with the government that he's delivering. It's big state, it's spending, it's taxing, and it's a huge opportunity for other parties to tap into that dissatisfaction. You mentioned Reclaim; they're obviously standing in the by-election as well, which is not hugely helpful.
I was going to ask you about that. What was your reaction to the Reclaim Party feeling the candidate? Don't get me wrong, I respect their right to stand democratically. How much do you think this will affect Kirsty's chances?
Well, I think if we were starting from scratch, we'd prefer that they weren't standing. But as you say, everybody has a right to stand. You get your nominations, you put up your deposit, and give the electorate the choice. And ultimately, it's up to the voters in Shropshire which side they prefer. I know there's been quite a few people sort of saying that some of us sort of smaller parties ought to try and talk a bit together and try and work together. And I'm sure by the time we get to the next general election, then there will be discussions, there will be ways of trying to avoid that happening. But I think Kirsty is herself a hugely strong candidate. She lives there, she was born there, she grew up there. Local, very strong local candidate. Was a local councillor. Her dad was leader of the council indeed a few years ago. And she works there, lives there.
Roots are there,
She is absolutely the local candidate, and particularly as the Conservatives in their wisdom chose to select a barrister from Birmingham, as I think the Lib Dems have labelled him. Kirsty, if you're of a kind of centre-right persuasion in North Shropshire and you want a local candidate who really is ingrained in that community, understands the needs of that community, as well as having sound political instincts, then Kirsty is clearly the person that people should be voting for.
Okay, talk about yourself for a minute. What are your current aspirations politically? As I understand it, you've already started campaigning for the local elections in Woodford. Can you tell the viewers about this, and what advice do you have for anyone considering running in local elections or becoming a parliamentary candidate or volunteering their time?
Fantastic. Well, London borough councils have all their elections next year. So every seat on every London borough council, 32 boroughs plus the City of London, all those seats are up next year, and it will be the only opportunity this side of the general election to get our name on as many ballot papers as possible. So we need to do that as part of the challenge that we're overcoming, is getting people aware of us existing. A big part of the way we tackle that is to get names on ballot papers. People go into the polling booth and they see the logo, they see the name,
and they know who we are,
and they know who, and then they'll learn who we are. So yes, I started campaigning already. I was a councillor in Redbridge before as a Conservative, and that's the borough that I still live in and where I'm standing. Woodford Bridge is the ward that I'm going to be standing in. It's a ward where we polled reasonably well in the London elections back in May. It's also a ward where we already have a councillor who joined us earlier in the year from the Conservatives, Robin Turberfield. He joined us because, like all of us really, very increasingly frustrated with the direction that the Boris government is taking. So I want to build on sort of his legacy as a sitting councillor, but also I've started campaigning. I've been delivering letters right across the ward, knocking on a few doors and speaking to people, introducing the party and introducing myself. And strongly recommend that anybody who is interested in doing the same. And I know you're looking to do exactly the same thing down here in Southwark. It's about establishing a connection with the local community first and foremost. Local politics is local. Yes, people stand on party logo, party names, party brands, and platforms. But what's also absolutely vital is that candidates have real roots in the community. You live there, you work there, you shop there. You understand what some of the key local issues can be, and it's about taking the time, and it does take a lot of time and effort. And I know you worked extremely hard in the London Assembly elections back in May, going out and spreading that message, delivering leaflets, knocking on doors, speaking to people. But the more you do that, the more traction you'll get. Strongly recommend.
I think social media plays a bigger part now than it ever has. Yeah,
I think so. Than it ever has done before. It was a sort of growing platform, and earlier this week I finally got around to relaunching my own Twitter profile, which is @Wilson4Woodford, and I'll be using that as a way of communicating in the run-up to the elections next year. But absolutely right. In fact, anybody watching who thinks they would like to stand as a candidate for reform, please do. It's very simple to stand for local council elections. There isn't a deposit that you need, so you don't need to put up money to actually stand. You just need to get 10 residents who live within the ward to sign your nomination papers, and there you are, you're on the ballot paper. And whether you want to just be a name on the ballot, which is hugely helpful, or whether you want to campaign more vigorously, it gives you a real opportunity to do that and get your name out there and get the party's name out there and get people into the habit of voting for Reform UK. Because when it comes to the general election, and we're in the process now of recruiting general election candidates, I think we've interviewed about 300 so far. We're aiming for 600 plus. So ideally we want to stand in every single constituency.
Of course.
We're still inviting applications. Look on the party website and the link should be there to apply. We want to be on as many ballot papers everywhere so people can understand who we are, get into the habit of voting for us, and send that really strong message to Boris, to the Conservatives, and not just to the Conservatives, the other parties as well. Because let's face it, it's very easy to criticise the Conservatives that they are in government, and that's obviously it's about part of it. It's about holding them to account for the decisions they've made and the mistakes they've made. But actually, the other parties have been asleep on the job as well. We have, the Labour Party is supposed to be the opposition,
hold them to account,
and they're just failing to do that. So we're not going to stand down for the Conservatives. We're not going to stand down for Labour.
No.
We are taking this on because nobody else is doing it.
Okay. Okay. I know you've campaigned against HS2 development during your by-election in June. You also work with a company that's building this, so you have more knowledge than most about this. Can you tell us a bit of background of what's going wrong?
Yeah, well, so in the Chesham and Amersham by-election, it was a huge issue. It's one of the parts of the country that is particularly affected by the route cutting through parts of the constituency, but without having the benefits of having a station or anything like that. So there's no gain for them. It's all pain.
Okay.
And it's disruption, it's cost, it's environmental damage.
Yeah.
You're right to point out, a few years ago I did actually work for HS2, so when I stood in the by-election, it was almost kind of like poacher turned gamekeeper.
Yeah.
But it's from having seen it from the inside and seeing just the level of cost and waste involved in a project like that. From the outside, it looks quite an exciting, shiny project. And if it was to deliver the benefits of connectivity and levelling up, to coin a phrase, then on the surface, fantastic. However, the huge cost, billions and billions. The budget's now estimated to be over 100 billion, whereas at the outset it was supposed to be limited at I think 33 billion. So it's trebled, and we're nowhere near to actually having a train line. It's the reason I turned against it really, and it was quite fortuitous that the opportunity came to put that to the test at a parliamentary by-election, is largely because of the huge cost. As someone of a, let's say, Conservative background, I don't like the idea of the government wasting taxpayers' money, and it's taxpayers' money. It's not government money. There's no such thing as government money.
No,
it's all taxpayers' money.
It's all our money. Yeah.
And the more the cost goes up, the less case there is for the project, and that's why I decided to take that stand.
Okay. So, do you think the recent announcement that a major part in the north is being scrapped of HS2? Do you think it's going to affect the way voters who voted for Boris based on the premise that he was going to level up will vote next time? In other words, should those that were in marginal, that had a narrow majority in the north who will let their vote in red wall seats be worried?
Yeah, I think there will be a lot of Conservative MPs in those seats that they gained for the first time in a generation in those parts of the country that will feel as if they've been kind of led down the garden path almost, and promised this and promised that, and actually where's the delivery? It's slightly ironic that the part of HS2 that's been scrapped on the eastern leg, going from West Midlands up through East Midlands, South Yorkshire and onto Leeds, is probably the part that actually made most sense and actually gave something genuinely new in connecting East Midlands through to Leeds and so on. Whereas just duplicating London to Birmingham to Manchester doesn't really add anything genuinely new. A bit of capacity, yes.
The part that's been scrapped would be the most benefit, I would have thought.
I think so. Certainly, looking at what extra connectivity would it have given? It seemed to be, to me, the bit that made the most sense. So it makes the least sense to be scrapping that. Of course, our policy as a party is to scrap the lot. Notwithstanding the fact a huge amount of money has been spent already, but just because you've thrown 6 billion, 10 billion, whatever it is, at something so far, isn't an excuse to spend another 90 billion. If the overall case doesn't stack up, and I think now it clearly doesn't, then really the time's to pull the plug on the whole thing.
Okay, right. Big issue at the moment, as you know, yesterday. As you know, myself and Matt Stevens recently made our views known on vaccine rollout and passports. Following yesterday's announcement about Plan B, which I feel with the timing that this is being used as a distraction to deflect attention from yet more scandal with Christmas parties at number 10, etc. Let's look at the facts as they stand. Okay, there are cases of new variant in the UK. It's hardly surprising with the huge amount of testing that's gone on. The important thing to point out, this is cases. Cases are not hospitalisations or deaths. which are for me what matters most, in which that figure stands at 0 as far as I know. And we're imposing restrictions for this. As I've said before, this is all about pushing out the vaccine rollout by ramping up the fare. It really wouldn't surprise me if pharmaceutical companies were pressuring the government, as this is big business for them. It's no coincidence the Pfizer boss the other day was suggesting an annual jab for everyone, while the health secretary put in an order for 140 million jabs for 2 years. Is this going to happen every time a new variant appears? What are your views on this?
Well, it's a huge issue that's been dominating politics and the media for 18 months now, and coming up to about 2 years nearly. And there are some things that the government has got right, and a lot of things that the government has got wrong. The vaccine, in general, I think has been a broadly successful project. I mean, I am double jabbed myself, and I think that people should have it, but it should be their choice.
Exactly, it should be that
absolutely
choice.
their
should
choice.
Be coerced.
We do not live in a country yet, and I hope we never live in a country where any medical treatment of any description is mandatory. It's just not how we do things, and it's wrong. And looking at other countries are starting, Austria, Germany, looking at doing this. And yesterday in his press conference, Boris kind of gave a hint that he'd be thinking about it.
Mandatory,
and I think that's going to cause an awful lot of upset on the Tory backbenches. But the success of our vaccine rollout was because it was voluntary, and you saw as soon as it started happening, and particularly at the beginning of the year, those most vulnerable groups were racing to get it done, and it had a huge effect on the numbers of hospitalisations and deaths. It was doing its job. The indications from the new variant seem to be that it's early days yet, and things could change, but certainly so far my understanding is that not a single person, not just in this country but anywhere in the world, has yet died from the new variant. So the idea that we should be using that as a trigger for bringing back more restrictions and difficulties is as with so much of what's happened over the last year, a gross overreaction. I won't be cancelling my Christmas party, but then it wouldn't matter anyway because I'm self-employed and I'm the only employee of the company, so I'll sit there at home with my glass of wine and a pizza. But no, the issue of the party, it sounds quite trivial really, but actually what the last couple of days have really kind of served to underpin is this sense that the government and those that are behind the government have been insisting on restrictions for everybody else, whilst themselves turning a blind eye and carrying on regardless. And that, I think, has really sent a shockwave through people's trust of this government, and you've seen the polls starting to turn against them now.
There's a lot of anger there.
And because it's one rule for me, one rule for you, and that's totally wrong. If we're all in this together, to put in another phrase, then we genuinely should all be in this together. It's totally wrong that people. I mean, we had plans last Christmas to spend Christmas with my family and my partner's family, and all that was scrapped because we were told not to, and we abided by the rules. And yet those that are making the rules seem to think they're exempt from them, and that's just not on.
No. I'm a football fan, and the Premier League has wasted no time in announcing that they're going to check all fans for vaccine passports, with any unvaccinated being denied entry. Surely this wasn't in the conditions when fans bought their season tickets and membership, etc. Just shows how much the clubs respect their fan base. None whatsoever. I think the contempt is disgusting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And especially going to a football match, it's outdoors. We know that being outdoors is far less risk anyway than indoor events. It's crazy, and especially the vaccine has been successful in cutting deaths and hospitalisations. Well, it doesn't completely cut this transmission, so you can be vaccinated and you can still transmit the disease. So even having a vaccine passport isn't a guarantee that it won't spread. What it means is that as an individual you're at less risk of becoming seriously ill, and that's great, but that's not an excuse for mandating anybody for anything.
Of course. Right, another issue is the ULEZ that was brought in. What are your views on this, in how it affects Londoners and people travelling into London?
Yeah, it's another huge issue, and another one where the cost to be borne by ordinary working people wasn't properly explained or discussed prior to it coming in a few weeks ago, or a couple of months ago, at the end of October, wasn't it? if you're running a diesel van, you're a self-employed tradesman, whatever, and the cost of replacing that is astronomical. And at a time when over the last year work has been less prosperous anyway,
course,
so you don't have the reserve to do that. It's just yet another example of the powers that be, and in this case it's the London Mayor, Sadiq Khan, showing nothing but contempt for ordinary people in London and who rely on their private transport to get about.
Of course.
And LTNs is another huge issue, related issue. I mean, obviously different issues, but very highly related. It's all part of that kind of war on the motorist, which has been propagated not just by the London Mayor, in Labour London Mayor, but also the Tory government's been funding all these schemes for doing that. Some Tory councils have not gone ahead with them, but the funding has been put up by the Tory government in order to launch these schemes, and so both main parties absolutely have their fingerprints all over it. It's only really parties like us with Reform UK that campaign very heavily in the London elections against both ULEZ and against LTNs, and I know you've been very involved in a lot of protests and meetings and so on about the LTNs, and you still are, and you're absolutely right. It should still be. It's still a very, very big issue. It doesn't actually help traffic issues; it makes it worse. It just diverts the traffic elsewhere. But also, those businesses that are in the areas affected by it, their customers can't get there. People can't travel to, and ambulances not being able to get through and things like that. It's really
emergency services. Of course,
it's crazy. Absolutely crazy. And it's absolutely right that we as a party take a very strong position that we're against all LTNs, period.
To be honest about LTNs, I think the Mayor has handled it terribly. He hasn't raised as much money as he expected, and now has his hand out threatening to make drastic cuts to public transport when it is needed the most, unless he gets more funding. He has forced people out of cars, and the infrastructure isn't there to cope. To me, this measure has never been about the environment or saving the planet. It's simply a money-making scheme to fund whatever virtual city projects he's come up with. Is a travel network able to cope with the extra demand, especially as from mid-January to May? The Bank Branch Northern Line is going to be closed for essential works, and now strike action by tube drivers over night-time opening of certain lines. The Mayor's handled this terribly yet again. Surely consultation with the union should have taken place, an agreement reached before implementing these measures and announcing them. So change of work hours and conditions, what do you think?
Well, TfL finances is a subject that we could probably talk about for hours.
Yes.
and multiple editions of the show, but under Khan's mayoralty, it's been very badly handled. I think he's using the pandemic as an excuse, as a smokescreen. Pre-pandemic, there were still huge problems with the TfL budget. He's sort of gone cap in hand to central government to bail them out, and almost sort of blackmailing them that they have to help them out. But it comes down to leadership, and that's something that London politics is sorely lacking at the moment. As far as strikes are concerned, I believe Sadiq Khan, when he was elected, he said he was going to have no strikes on the network. Obviously, that is another broken promise.
There's going to be no free travel on New Year's Day, New Year's Eve either.
Well, I'll be tucked up at home with a glass of whiskey or something, and I won't be travelling.
Okay. Anyone else you want to talk about?
No, I don't think so. Other than just to all your viewers out there, it's really good time to get involved with what we're doing now. We've had the successful result in Bexley last week. It was our first ever safe deposit, and coming ahead of the Lib Dems and the Greens, we really cemented ourselves as a genuine, credible political choice. The next stage will be the London Council elections next year, and we want as many candidates as possible for that. And the next stage will be the general election. There will be a general election within the next 2 or 3 years, and it's really, really important that everybody has the opportunity to vote for not what they're scared of, but what they believe in. So don't see it as an opportunity. Oh well, if you vote Labour, then the Tories will get in, or vote Labour, vote Tories, Labour. Don't see it like that. An election is a once every 4 or 5 years opportunity to really have your say on how you think the future of the country should be governed. And we know from the doors that we're knocking on, there are a lot of people that are not happy, and are not happy with the government, but also not happy with the other opposition parties because they've been asleep on the job. That's why it's a really good opportunity for us, and it's a good opportunity for people to vote for us, support us, get involved, deliver leaflets, but crucially, stand. Be that name on the ballot paper. Be the face of the party in your local community, and that way we can all carry on our crucial campaign to change politics for good.
Another important point to bring up as well is that unlike with the major parties, if you're elected, you'll be able to put the local constituencies' interests first. There won't be no whipping or anything like that. You'll be able to put their interests first.
To see how that operates in practice, we first got to get people elected. It was the first challenge, but no, you're absolutely right. We're not we're not beholden to a sort of centralised party whip. So anyone that is elected as a local councillor or indeed as a member of parliament will always be able to, with a clear conscience, put the considerations of the people that elected them first and foremost in everything that they do.
Okay. Thank you, Alex. Thank you very much. Just a quick reminder, if you're watching on the YouTube channel, please, if you like our content, share it with your friends, etc. And most importantly, subscribe, click on the little bell, and you'll get notifications whenever we download content, so you never miss a show. Thank you very much, and thank you for watching.